Hello. Hello, hello. Hello, my name is Will I Am, and this is a short story titled Take Me With You. Axel barked the faintest bark. He was hidden behind the drapes. His tail was pointed straight out, lifting them up. What is it? Daniel teased. It could have been a squirrel or the neighbor's cat. He closed the refrigerator door and walked to Axel. The only light on in the house was a table lamp in the living room. The sound of galloping horses over a western soundtrack carried through the house. Ella and Tamitha insisted on watching a western. Ella was laughing. It was black outside, and Daniel stood with Axel, staring into nothing for a while. Go see what it is, said Daniel, as if Axel could open the door himself. The door was next to the window, and as Daniel stepped towards it and reached for the knob, Axel quickly moved into position. Daniel slowly turned the knob until there was a quiet thud. The weather ceiling around the door made a plastic ripping sound. Axel wedged his nose in the crack and pried it open. He squeezed his head through, then his shoulders, then he ran as fast as he could run. Daniel watched him shoot into the darkness, like a rock falling into a well. It was a moonless night, and the nearest streetlight was a quarter of a mile away. Daniel listened for a few seconds. There was not a sound. He closed the door and turned around. He cracked the seal on a water bottle he was holding and walked into the living room. Ella and Tamitha were laying on the floor in front of the TV. There was a family photo album opened in front of them. Daniel quietly made his way to the chair. His pajamas were red, with thin black vertical stripes. The shirt had white buttons down the front. Ella pointed to a baby picture of him, and Tamitha laughed. He sat down. The leather cushion rubbing on the arms was audible. Ella glanced at him. The girls had made themselves at home. They were in their underwear with t-shirts. Ella's shirt was advertised in a local water park, and Tamitha's was just a plain yellow t-shirt. On TV, a gunfight broke out, and the hero was diving behind a stack of barrels. Daniel set the water bottle on a coaster by the lamp, then sunk into his chair. Ella nudged Tamitha with her elbow. Tammy, your nails are so pretty, she said. Tamitha looked at her nails, then at Ella. They both smiled at each other. Tamitha had a new purse and a new makeup kit. The purse was behind them, pushed against the legs of the coffee table. Daniel looked at the girls. He noticed they were wearing blush and lipstick and eyeliner. Ella lifted up her feet. The light was dim, and he couldn't see the color of her toenail polish. He stared at her feet for a few seconds. The hero on TV was riding out of town on a horse, and men were running into the street shooting at him. It's getting late, thought Daniel. He picked the water bottle up. The girl should go to bed, he thought. He lifted the water bottle up to his lips to take a sip, but just at that moment, the phone rang, and it jolted him. And some water splashed on his shirt. He stood up from his chair, and the girls were looking at him. He couldn't remember the last time he had a call this late. He walked briskly to the kitchen and picked the phone up. Hello, he answered. His tone was polite but slightly annoyed. The only sound coming from the phone was a faint electric buzzing. Hello? He answered again. The caller hung up. He put the phone down and looked into the living room. The girls were looking at a photo album. The photo album. He walked to the window and looked outside. His face was nearly touching the window, and he held the drapes behind him to block the light. The light switch for the porch light was by the door, and he swung his arm up in an arc to flip it on. The light illuminated the grass all the way to the tree line. He trained his eyes to look for Axel's collar. It was made of a special material to make it easier for motorists to see. Daniel saw nothing. Some beetles started flying into the light. He opened the door and stepped outside. The concrete felt cold on the bottom of his feet. Axel, he called. He waited for a few seconds. There was a snapping tree branch in the woods. He closed the door and took a few more steps to the edge of the porch. Axel, he called again. He could hear a truck on the highway overpass miles away, but he couldn't hear Axel. Daniel got a bright idea. He turned the corner of the porch, where he had an old metal toolbox. He walked to it and took a heavy-duty flashlight out. He turned it on and shined it at the trees. He saw tiny insects in the beam of light. It was humid, and the beam made a bluish cone. He slowly scanned the light from one end of the tree line to the other. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Axel wasn't there. Daniel continued scanning. The woods seemed unnaturally empty. There were no squirrels or birds. The animals were all asleep. The beam crossed a single strand of silk from a spider. He turned the flashlight off. The glow of the nearby town made a silhouette of the treetops. Daniel sighed. The dog will come back, he thought. He put the flashlight back in the toolbox and closed the lid. When he started walking to the door, he saw movement in the window. It startled him. And then he laughed. Ella and Tamitha were watching him. He walked slowly, pretending he didn't see them. When he opened the door and stepped inside, the two girls were standing in the kitchen. He didn't say anything and closed the door. The light under the kitchen cabinet was on. He noticed their phones on the counter. "Do you have everything you need?" he asked. The girls nodded. They knew what he was asking. It was the latest they had stayed up in the time they had lived there. He stood straight up and breathed in deeply. "I'll go to bed soon," he said, and walked past them. The girls normally brushed their teeth before bed, and that's what he expected them to do. He was walking to the living room, and once he was in the doorway, he put his hand over the light switch. He turned around and saw the girls going into the bathroom. He turned the light off. They had the whole corner of the house to themselves at night. The bedroom and the bathroom were connected, so they didn't have to go through the hallway. He walked into the living room. Oh, man. The Western was still on. And the photo album was sitting on the coffee table. He sat down and took a sip of water. The Western was almost over. The hero was sitting in front of a fire, and there was a man sitting across from him. They were speaking Spanish, and there were subtitles. The two were planning to rescue a woman. Daniel was trying to get his mind off of Ella and Tamitha, but they were still awake. The living room still felt like a shared space. He looked around the room. The photo album being out was the only evidence they were there tonight. He stood up and walked to the coffee table. He picked the photo album up and opened the cover. The first photo was of him taken at his graduation. He turned to the next photos. It was two wedding photos. One was of him standing with the bride. The other was of her throwing a bouquet. Their names and the wedding date were written at the bottom. He knelt down and pulled a box out from underneath the coffee table. It was full of photo albums. He closed the album and put it away in the box, then pushed it back under the table. He was starting to feel tired. He wasn't dressed to go looking for the dog. The hero on TV and his Mexican friend were climbing up a rope into a window. Daniel sat back down. The clock chimed. He looked at it, and then at his watch. They were only a few minutes different, and the TV remote was by his chair. He picked it up and turned the volume down. The swinging pendulum of the clock made a sharp ticking sound every time it swung. It's time for bed, he thought. He turned the TV off. The silence was piercing. He set the remote down and sat and listened to the clock. He looked at the water bottle and it was still sweating. The base of the lamp appeared stretched and twisted through the water. The light reflecting off the brass finish was a blurry yellow streak. He stood up from his chair and turned the lamp off. The bedroom door was behind the chair. His bedroom was a long, narrow room on the side of the house. It had a bathroom, much like how the girls had. He entered the room and turned the lights on above the sink. When he closed the door, the rest of the house stopped existing. Time stopped existing. He was standing at the sink. He turned the water on and wet his toothbrush. His reflection in the mirror didn't want to look at him. He used his hand to cup the water into his mouth. He swished it around and gargled it, then spit it out. The toothpaste was on the edge of the sink. He picked it up and unscrewed the cap with one hand. The tube was almost empty, and he had to bend it at the end to push the toothpaste out. He put the brush in his mouth and used his tongue to distribute the paste. He brushed the front of his teeth and then the back. He shivered when he brushed the top and bottom of his mouth. He leaned over the sink and started drooling. When he brushed his tongue, he gagged. For as long as he could remember, this was how he brushed his teeth. He spit the toothpaste out. The water was still running, and he rinsed his mouth. There was a bottle of mouthwash next to the toothpaste. It was a blue liquid, and it matched the color of the hand towels. The bottle hadn't been opened yet, and it was sealed. He used his fingernail to peel the plastic off, then pinched the sides of the cap to unscrew it. He took a mouthful from the bottle, then screwed the cap back on. He only swished it around for a few seconds before he gargled it and spit it out. He rinsed his mouth with water one more time, then turned the water off. The water running down the drain made a hollow dripping sound. He used a small washcloth to clean the sink bowl and soaked the water up. The hand towel was hanging on a holder on the wall. He dried his face with it, then turned the lights off. The nightlight was enough for him to make his way to the bed. He walked past the foot of the bed to the window and looked outside. It was so dark outside, the glare from the nightlight extinguished everything but a silhouette of his body. He was looking through his own figure into an abyss. With every passing second, the reality he was avoiding gripped him tighter. He took a deep breath and smiled and whispered out loud, "That damn dog." He turned around and walked to the other end of the room. His boots were lined up by the door, leading outside to the back of the house. He sat in a small wooden chair and slipped a pair of brown rubber boots on. The door was taunting him. The sound of opening it would be heard from across the house. Ella and Tamitha re-entered his mind. The girls had an almost magical ability to influence him. No matter where they were, He quickly opened the door just enough to squeeze his body through. When he was outside, he could only see the edge of the roof. He felt the grass brushing on his boots while he walked. He made it to the porch and found the toolbox. He was reaching over a patch of daffodils and trying not to step on them. His memory of the porch made him almost believe he could see. He lifted up the lid on the toolbox and held it open while he fished inside for the flashlight. The familiar cold cylinder sent a wave of relief across his body. He held it in his hand and let the lid down softly. The flashlight empowered Daniel. He waited to turn it on. Once he was around the corner, the glow of the lights from town were in his sight. They kept him oriented while he was walking down the driveway. He turned his head to look at the house. There was a light on. It was coming from Ella and Tamitha's bedroom. They were still awake. When he reached the end of the driveway, he looked both ways down the road. There were no lights. It was a graded dirt road with trees on both sides. He turned the flashlight on and shined it down the road. He hoped to see a stripe of light from Axel's collar, but there was nothing. He stood in the road thinking. Axel could have chased a deer, and Daniel wondered how far he would have chased it. He felt guilty, and thoughts kept racing through his head. He pointed the flashlight across the road. The grass in the ditch wasn't very inviting. He crossed the road anyways. He wanted to check the field. He hiked his legs up and used his arms to push the grass out of the way. The field was silent. He scanned the flashlight across the grass. It all looked undisturbed. He knew it wouldn't do much good to keep looking for Axel like this. To look for Axel in the dark like this. He pointed the flashlight at the ground and backtracked to the road. He was briefly distracted by the shape the light made on the ground. He toyed with the flashlight for a few seconds. He knew the beam of light was cone-shaped, and the shape he saw was a slice of it. He turned the flashlight off. The stars were bright and caught his attention. He raised his head, and just by luck, his eyes landed on the constellation of Orion. Daniel stopped walking. He stood motionless, looking at the stars. It struck him. The weight of his body pushed his boots against the earth. He could feel the earth's pull. The ground he stood on was, for as long as he gazed, reduced to what he already knew it was. He wished it would release him. He tried to imagine the stars as specks of dust. They were floating in the air in front of him. If only he could take a step. Daniel laughed. He blinked his eyes and looked at the trees. He saw them only as silhouettes of random shapes, but he knew they were trees. The earth was returning to an abstraction. It was the ground, and he was walking on it. The events of tonight were an inescapable truth. His body ached, and he was dragging his feet when he reached the porch. He dropped the flashlight in the toolbox and walked along the same path around the back of the house. The grass on his boots welcomed him home. He didn't slow down or hesitate approaching the door. It didn't scare him anymore. He opened it and stepped inside. Daniel opened his eyes. He couldn't remember falling asleep. He turned his head and saw the midday sun shining on the trees outside. The house was silent, and the birds were chirping. He sat up slowly and pulled the blanket back, then carefully swung his feet out over the side of the bed. The blood was rushing to every part of his body. He heaved himself up and stretched his arms and legs. He was standing on his toes and reaching for the ceiling. He yawned. Ella and Tamitha normally turn the TV on by now, but the TV was off. He stepped to the window. The sky was clear. He couldn't see any clouds. He looked down across the road at the field. What he saw made him gasp. "Axel!" he cried. Axel was running across the field, and there was a small black dog running behind him. They were playing. Daniel turned around and ran to the door. He shoved his feet into his boots and bolted out. The wind was blowing through his pajamas and he felt naked. His heart was racing. He ran down the driveway to the road and jumped across the ditch. "Axel," he shouted. Just as he did, in the corner of his eye, he saw the legs of a woman sitting behind a tree. He looked back to Axel, who was running straight at him. He fell down on his knees in the grass, and Axel blazed past him. Daniel couldn't contain his happiness. He burst into laughter. Axel sprinted up the field with the black dog hot on his tail. When they reached the end, they ran along the creek. Ella and Tamitha were sitting on the bank. Ella was putting flowers in Tamitha's hair. The dogs ran within a foot of them, and they both winced and squealed. The woman was turned around now and looking at Daniel. He looked at her, and when he saw her looking back, he cleared his throat. His expression turned into a smug grin. She was blushing and trying not to laugh. He didn't care to ask why she was there. He started walking towards her, and she stood up. They didn't say anything. He walked all the way to the tree and held his hand out. "Daniel," he said. She threw her arms around him and kissed him on the cheek. "Susan," she said. He glanced at her clothes. She had tan athletic shorts and a purple tank top. He smiled at her and broke the ice. "Tell me," he said. She looked at the girls. "Axel jumped over my fence this morning," she said. Daniel laughed and took her hand in his hand. "I'm about to make some coffee," he said. She looked at him and raised an eyebrow. "I don't drink coffee," she said. Daniel was staring at her. "There's orange juice too," he said, and let go of her hand. She smiled and grabbed his arm. "Take me with you,"